Not only is the Bible the center of Judeo-Christianity, but of course we have the cross, the crucifix, the story of Calvary. Well, Madame Helena Blavatsky says the crucifix was an instrument of torture and utterly common among Romans, as it was unknown among Semitic nations. It is certainly not the Christian cross that John had in mind when speaking of the signet of the living God. That's right. It wasn't the cross of Calvary, of torture, that John had in mind. We're going to find out what cross he had in mind when he was thinking of symbolizing Christianity. Tony Bushby says of it, the symbol of the cross originated as part of an ancient Egyptian initiatory rite and eventually found its way into Christianity. The church stated that in its history there is no proof of the use of the cross until much later than the 6th century. It is recorded in Christian archives that the general use of the crucifix was ratified at the 6th Ecumenical Council in 680 AD. The council decreed that the figure of a man fastened to a cross now be adopted, and the new church logo was later confirmed by Emperor Hadrian I. About a century later, the first pictures of Jesus Christ standing against a cross slowly start to appear. So we're talking about 700-800 years after the rise of Christianity, the cross suddenly becomes the central motif. Bishop Coleno, he said that of the several varieties of cross still in vogue as national and ecclesiastical emblems, there is not amongst them the existence of which may not be traced to the remotest antiquity. They were the common property of the Eastern nations. So there's nothing unique about the cross in Christianity. Tony Bushby, in his Bible Fraud, he says, there was no verification of a landmark or significant crucifixion of a person called Jesus Christ in the writings of such highly regarded contemporary historians as Philo, Tacitus, Pliny, Suetonius, Epictetus, Cluvius, Rufus, Quintus, Curtius Rufus, Josephus, Plutarch, and the Roman consul Publius Petronius. None, no mention. Stephen Knapp, in his book Proofs of a Vedic Culture's Global Existence, he says, it was not until the 6th Synod of Constantinople that it was decided that the symbol of Christianity would be represented from that time on as a man crucified on a cross. In fact, the earliest instances of any artwork that illustrates Jesus on a cross can be traced back only to the 8th or 9th century. So how biographical is that? That they have to wait 800 years before they go, oh, let's use a cross. But of course, the ancient world knew all about it and had been using it for generations. Its origin, again, is the zodiac. We have two phenomena, two other cycles of importance in the heavens, without which you couldn't have astrology or astronomy, and these are known as the ecliptic and the celestial equator. There is a trajectory of the sun around the earth. Okay, we mentioned that. There's the trajectory of the sun around the earth. That is a band of about 17 degrees wide, on which are the major constellations. That is the zodiac. Now this belt itself crosses another belt called the celestial equator. When the sun annually reaches the junction point of this cross, we have the spring and autumn equinoxes. Now for those of you who are coming to this for the first time and have no background in astrology or astronomy, simply take a globe, or take even two globes. Take the one that has the axis bent, like a globe of the planet Earth. And then imagine another globe that's not the Earth, but just a perfect sphere. Right? They're one in one hand, one in the other. A perfect sphere, like a crystal ball, and then the other one, a globe. If you have one in your house, pick it up and look at it. The axis goes this way. And of course, if the axis of the Earth goes that way, then the equator of the Earth is at a slight slant of 25 degrees, right? 23 point something degrees or whatever it is. If you project that equator out to the night sky, which of course is nothing but another dome around the whole of the Earth, can be considered the theater of the night sky as a dome to astrologers and astronomers. But if you project that plane of the ecliptic, that's the equator, we're talking the equator here, think of that as being magnified or projected out to the night sky. That is what is known in astrology as the ecliptic, the ecliptical belt. But of course the night sky would have its own equator, would it not? That night sky that envelops the Earth can be that other globe that you're holding in your imagination, which has a straight axis. If that equator around that other globe was projected out, it would be straight. So one would be curved and one would be straight. And if you bring them together like those two hoops that a magician uses, right? Get two bracelets and bring them together at an angle, they will cross at 2 points. Right? So two interlocking circles have 2 points of conjunction. In the year, when you cross the ecliptic and the celestial equator, those two joins is where we have, when the sun reaches them, that is, we have the spring and autumn equinoxes. So as the sun approaches those two junctions, as you can see in that diagram there, at the place where the two belts cross, you have the solstices and the equinoxes. And of course, there's 2 of each, making 4. There's a better picture of it. The vernal equinox facing the autumnal equinox, the summer solstice facing the winter solstice. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the original cross that John was talking about as the symbol of Christianity, because he understood that the 12 disciples, Jesus representing the sun, from the Nativity onwards, this was all about the solar cult. And he wanted the symbol of the cross to represent the zodiacal cross, the great cross of the zodiac. How many flags do you know? How many flags do you know in the world that contain that cross? Here's a St. George's cross. What you're actually seeing there is a minute part of these 2 cycles. Those 2 lines, or those 2 bars, look very straight, don't they? But if you were to project them out and think of them actually as 2 circles, and the point of crossing is the crossing of those 2 circles, now you will understand why the flags of the world were chosen with stars and motifs on them, and why this peculiar symbol of the cross is found. It represents that very coming together, but of course they're focusing in on it, of the crossing point of the ecliptic and the equator. And the blue is nothing but the sky above. From Celtic crosses onwards, which are most blatant images of this, we see the circle of the zodiac and the solar cross, the astrological cross. So just remember, when you see the cross and the sun god, we're talking astrology again. Here's the symbol for the Golden Dawn, secret society. They know all about it. There's the cross of 4, and below it the Trinity and the sun. Here's a corporate logo for the X-Files. It's just one of many. You pick on this one right now, but there's many like this, showing you exactly the same idea, the Earth. But look how mysteriously this cross of the X is placed. Somebody knows something. And when the sun moves into position at the cross junction, we have the solstices and equinoxes, the rising of the sun. And this is an explanation of why we have in the Bible the famous star in the east, and the 3 wise men following that star. Now, the star that never sets, or the great star that was the bright star in heaven, we have to understand is nothing but the sun itself. There's no bright star that the 3 holy men were following. I mean, if it was a bright star, then what did these guys do during the day when there's no stars out? Did they stay at the Howard Johnson and get up and jump on their camels at night and make their way to Bethlehem? Of course not. We understand that this is a propaganda story, and that the bright star that is in the sky is nothing but the sun itself. They were astrologers plotting the sun. They were travelers coming to acknowledge the rising of the sun at the equinox. The word Easter comes from 2 words, eastern and star. The famous eastern position where the sun rises on the eastern equinox. Equinox meaning equal day, equal night. Throughout all the corporate logos of the world, we'll find so many examples of this cross point of the zodiac. That's what you're seeing when you look at NATO and many of these other logos. The merchant hasn't the faintest idea what these symbols mean, but the ad men who draw them up are aware that they are descendants of the stellar cult, and they know the power of these symbols. And we have, of course, a Bible, and we have a New Testament, but we clearly find that the New Testament is divided into 4 books, not 3, not 5, but 4. The reason, again, has to do with the zodiac. Those 4 books or Gospels are known as the book of Matthew, the book of Mark, the book of Luke, and the book of John. Everyone is taught that from point go. But what we're not taught is that those 4 books of the Bible just represent the 4 cardinal points of the zodiac. The book of Aries, the book of Libra, the book of Leo, and the book of Aquarius. How can that be? he says that it was not and is still not possible to ascertain when and how those early Gospels came into being. Neither original manuscripts, not early references to such manuscripts existed. And even approximate dating is uncertain. Now, Ernest Busenbach, in his book Symbols, Sex, and the Stars, says that not only do the Gospel writers fail to offer appropriate evidence to substantiate their claims upon the grounds of reasonable probability, but their numerous discrepancies, contradictions, and omissions, their readiness to accept as facts rumors and legends which they have heard at third and fourth hand, their obvious role as reformers, their desire to promote these doctrines, and their apparent willingness to even invent stories to promote these doctrines is proof that instead of being objective historians, they were decidedly propagandists. Indeed, if any subject other than religion were involved, is it extremely doubtful whether any body of thoughtful men would take their writings of such men seriously. Tony Bushby says that church experts admit to no evidence of the existence of the Gospels for at least a century after the time it is said Jesus Christ was born in a manger. The most ancient literature fails to show any trace of the acquaintance with, nor the use of, the Gospels we know today. It is not possible to find in any writings compiled between the beginning of the 1st century and the middle of the 2nd century any reference to Jesus Christ or the Gospels. So what we're talking about is that the Christians didn't have it until they get to Rome and realize, wait a minute, we can soup this whole story up with the zodiac. We've got to turn back to the stellar cult. They had it all nailed down. Let's just borrow some of their mythologies and, re-script our stuff because it's familiar to all the people of the world. Now, Tony Bushby in Bible Fraud says the Dead Sea Scrolls made no mention of Jesus Christ or the early Christian church. It has long been known that there was information in the Dead Sea Scrolls damning to Christian beliefs, and the church's high-level involvement with interpreting the scrolls fostered a grave element of suspicion. Since the scrolls were found some 6 decades ago, close associates of the Vatican were placed in dominant positions in every phase of the investigation and translation of the scrolls. The priests regulated the flow of information and controlled its release. Now, those who've done their homework with Christianity, who've studied Christianity, know that its birthplace was at the Constantine's Council of Nicaea. Okay, so the Council of Nicaea is where everyone who would be the original patriarchs and founders of the Christian religion got together at a place. On June 21st, the day of the summer solstice, isn't that interesting? On June 21st, the day of the summer solstice, a total of 2,048 presbyters, deacons, subdeacons, acolytes, and exorcists gathered at Nicaea to decide what Christianity really was, what it should be, and what writings were to be used, and who was to be its God. The Emperor Constantine presided over the council. Dean Millman says of this, nowhere is Christianity less attractive and less authoritative than in these councils of the church. The degeneracy is rapid from the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD to the first of Ephesus in 431 AD, where each party came determined to use every means of haste, maneuver, court, influence, bribery to crush its adversary. Tony Bushby says of it, after a long and bitter debate, a vote was taken, and it was with a majority show of hands that Judas Chrestus and Rabbi Jesus both became God, 161 votes to 157. A new God was proclaimed and officially ratified by Emperor Constantine.